Hey folks, so this week during a video lesson I got asked about the out, how and when to teach it, as well as its relationship to the lift or choke off. If you learned something during this video, please give it a like. If you agree with what I say, don't forget to subscribe and lock yourself into an echo chamber. And if you don't agree or you got something to add, feel free to put it in the comments. Okay, let's talk about the out, right? So choking a dog off of a bite is not training an out, it's actually going to train an in, right? So the more that you just sort of choke the dog off, and you see some people do this, they'll say out to the dog and then they'll choke the dog off the bite. And I think that is a terrible thing to do, because then you're putting a lot of conflict into the out, right? If the out means I'm going to take that from you, right? What you want to do when you are choking a dog off, like you absolutely should be choking a dog off bites at times, is you want to make it seem like the dog, and some dogs are too strong, but you want to make it seem like the dog is too strong for you to get off at times and let them go back into the bite, right? Because if every time you put your hands on the dog collar, you choke them off, classical conditioning takes over, and yes, you will end up with an out. But if you said out and then you choke the dog off, then of course you will end up with an out. But you'll also end up with a dog that every time it gets its collar touched will let go, right? So what I want is, when I'm choking a dog off, it's because I need the dog off, right? But it's not because I'm teaching an out. And regularly, pretty much at least as regularly as I actually get the dog off of the bite, I'll act as though the dog has beaten me and let him back into the bite. Similarly, I must also be touching the dog's collar a lot without choking him off, so that isn't a marker for that happening, right? So that I don't want every time I touch the dog's collar for him to assume he's being choked off. So I'm going to come up, I'm going to touch the collar, I'm going to pull back on it, I'm going to push it forward, I'm going to move it around, I'll twist it, do all kinds of things like that so that the dog doesn't find a pattern. Actually teaching the dog to out, I wouldn't dream of doing on a decoy. Like, I want my dog to know the out really well on a variety of objects, no matter my method of teaching it, before I put them in a position where I'm going to ask them to let go of something that's really, truly high stakes. There is a pretty strong misconception that having a dog that can out will reduce how well they can bite, because that is the case if the out is taught with a lot of aversion. So if you have a dog that bites and you just fry him, you say out and fry him, then of course he's going to bite with hesitation. Some dogs will never bite again because they're punished for biting, right? But some dogs will then bite to out, and that's worst case scenario as well. What you don't want is a dog that bites to let go. This is all completely avoided by teaching the dog that when I give the command to bite, it's not that I'm taking anything away from you, it's that I know that the fun has stopped, and that my command to out is telling you that it's over, but by letting go and performing the guard or whatever it is you want your dog to do post-release is the process to restarting the fun access of biting, right? And so for a long time, we always do re-grips, and a dog that is taught to out properly, whether we teach it through non-reinforcement, whether we use a little bit of pressure, or whether we teach it as a reflexive out that's taught on something the dog doesn't want, and we click and we mark and it becomes a conditioned response the dog can't overcome. No matter which one of those techniques we use, so long as what we're actually communicating to the dog is that the thing that you have in your mouth is no longer the thing that you thought it was. The game that you thought you were having, you are no longer having. It has stopped, right? And if you want to get access to that again, you must let go and you must perform the behavior that will start that. And ultimately that's your guard. And whether you have a barking guard or a silent guard or a recall, whatever it is, right? That, when the dog understands it, he then understands, right, I'll do that as quickly as possible to restart the game. And for a time, and forever, but with a less frequency, it must restart the game. So initially it always restarts, and then we can go to a variable schedule, and then we can get to the point where we don't need to redo it so much, right? Like it's not like the dog understands out will eventually lead to a rebite at some point. It doesn't need to be right there and then. We always end up in this balancing act with biting dogs between letting them re-grip versus picking them up in the heel versus calling them back. And if the out is taught reflexively the way I like to teach it, that has much less to do with the likelihood of whether the dog will out when I tell him to. I expect that will always happen. It has much more to do with the behavior that he will do post the out. So for me, it's important that I do let my dog re-grip intermittently after the out, not in order to reinforce the out, but in order to make sure that he stays in the guard and stays intensely focusing on the decoy. Because if I always out him and recall him back to me, then he wants to rebite and he thinks the path in doing that is coming back to me. So absent the recall, he will come back to me, or he'll look at me, or he'll try and find the behavior that will lead to the regrip. This is a problem I personally have with the transport, because we do a lot of transporting. I practiced it a lot, and my dog enjoys the flea bite in the transport. I think genetically he probably would have enjoyed to be a leg dog, and he's allowed to bite the legs in the flea from the transport. So what he will do, if left to his own devices, when he's told to out, will go into a transport on the decoy, because he's like, this is the type of regrip that I want. I'll show you the behavior that will lead to the type of regrip that I want. So I regularly will have to get the decoy to hold him on a line, or I'll backline him, or find some way of showing to him that he can't go into the transport position. He has to stay in the guard. And like I say, to the observer, they might think I'm reinforcing his out. And I'm not. What I'm actually reinforcing is the position of the guard, right? But to kind of put all that into the picture of relevance to you, is that it's absolutely fine to teach an out, right? And you should be teaching an out away from your bite work, right? And it's only a problem if you put too much compulsion into the out and force it, or if you put too much value in the out, right? And that could be, via compulsion, or via something that if the dog isn't really a great biting dog and you reinforce with something else that he much prefers, that can be an issue, because then he's biting as a job to get something else. Now, with some dogs, we have to do that because that's the process. That's how they are, but that's not ideal. What we want is a dog that is happily biting with all of his intensity and power focused entirely on that. And when he's told to out, he knows that the path to getting back to where he was is by outing. And there's many ways you can teach that, as we said. But this myth that if you teach a dog to out, he won't bite with full intensity, that is only true if you teach a dog to out poorly and with too strong a consequence too early.